Well, welcome back to the Calibrate show. If my voice sounds like it's getting a little hoarse, I have done this 4 times. The first time I rambled a lot. The second time I didn't hit record. The third time I hit record, but I had it on a different setting, and so it wasn't captured correctly. So we're doing this again. Stick around after the bumper. Don't go around tonight. All right. All right. Welcome back to the show after the bumper. That is my brother and his band, The Sauce, singing Creedence Clearwater Revival's Bad Moon Rising. It's a great apocalyptic song that really captures what we're doing here. In the last episode, I mentioned, we talked about wars, rumors of wars, and how they're not the signs of the end because Jesus says the end is not yet. These things will continue to happen. But then I said we were going to get into some concrete stuff, and today that is going to be the case. And I'm going to do this, like I said, 4th time, guys. I've had a lot of practice, so this is going to be good. All right, to start off, to understand the abomination of desolation. So we're in Matthew 24, verse 15. If you're just now joining us, this is kind of where he really gets into some real signs. And then he quotes the prophet Daniel. So to understand what he's talking about, we need to study Daniel. So today we're going to study chapter 8. And I'm going to briefly introduce, I'm not going to go into detail like I had been or ramble much. I'm going to briefly introduce 2 theories of chapter 8 in the book of Daniel. And that is theory number 1. It's the classical interpretation of the book of Daniel in chapter 8 that the chapter is partially fulfilled by a guy named Alexander the Great. The prophecy tells us that there's this goat that attacks a ram. The ram is the Medes and the Persians. The goat is Yevon. English, it says Greece. I'm going to read through this in a bit, but right now I'm just running through the theory. It says Yevon. English translation said Greece. It's basically modern-day Turkey. It's like the Istanbul region, but which, to be fair, kind of combines the two, ancient Greece, Macedonia, Assyrian lands. And he invades against this ram, the Medes and the Persians. He breaks them, he wins, and then he conquers pretty much the entire Middle East. He conquers Egypt and North Africa, conquers Israel, and then he passes away, and his kingdom gets parceled out to the 4 winds. The book of Daniel will say 4 horns come up after him. And this would be the Diadochi, that basically means the successors, Greek for successors. His successors, how do you say it? There's Cassander, Thessali, Lysimachus, and there's also Seleucus. Now, there's a 5th one, and we'll get into that when it comes to theory 2, but those are the 4 that most Bible prophecy teachers will mention. And then a very short time after them, the 5th one shows up, and that's Antigonus the One-Eyed. He's a really cool character, actually. He's like a totally war vet and runs circles around these dudes. He's a 5th one. Now, for what it's worth, he is part of one of the families that separates in one of these horns. So there's 4 families that still, even with the 5 of those guys, there's 4 families. So for what it's worth, 4 horns, 4 winds of heaven, and parceled out the 4 winds. So Alexander the Great's empire gets broken up. And that does happen. And then they will say, up to verse 9, when it talks about the little horn, then it starts talking about the future, the Antichrist. Interestingly enough, now some people, and this isn't always preterism, they will look at Daniel chapter 7, and you get to this dragon, there's horns, and 4 of them are uprooted, and then 1 comes up. This is Daniel 7, and they'll say that's the Antichrist. But Daniel 8's talking about a different person. It's a little horn, but it's a different little horn. And it doesn't make sense to me at all. I think this is the same person. And they'll say, this would be Antiochus. But again, Daniel 8, later on, verse 15 through 19, there's an angel sent to Daniel, Gabriel, and Gabriel tells him this pertains to the time of the end. Now, this is theory one, right? Partial past, partial future, kind of bleeds over. And there's biblical precedence for that when Jesus reads the scroll of Isaiah and he reads the year of the Lord's favor, but he does not read the day of vengeance because it's still way off in the future. So theory one, I have no problems with. I think it could actually be the case. But there's a second theory. It's relatively new. It's that this whole thing is future. And I'm going to read through this for a second. Forgive me if I'm a little hoarse. Like I said, I've done this a lot. More than I should have. Anyway, let me hold this up so I'm not like looking way away from you guys. Okay? Hold still, Mike. I am recording, right? Yeah. Okay. So I had to check. I'm recording and the mic is on. Good news, guys. All right. So I'm going to read through this because I actually kind of lean towards theory 2, and I'm going to show you why. So theory 2, I'm going to start at verse 2. I looked in the vision, and while I was looking, I was in the citadel of Susa, which is in the province of Elam, and I looked in the vision, and I myself was beside the Ulai Canal. I'm going to try to figure out how to put a map in this area right here. But I'm going to explain this. It's basically, if you look at the Persian Gulf, it's right north of that. He's right around there. And anyway, so he says, Then I raised my eyes and looked, and behold, a ram which had 2 horns was standing in front of the canal. Now the 2 horns were long, but one was longer than the other, and the longer one coming up last. I saw the ram butting westward, northward, and southward. No other beast could stand against him, nor was there anyone to rescue him from his power, but he did as he pleased, and he made himself great. Now, for what it's worth, for theory 1, the Medes and the Persians do this, the 2 horns being the Medes and the Persians. But if you look today at Iran, this would be the location of Iran today. Iran has, one, they have 2 leaders in their government. They have they have like a president, and they have a supreme leader, like a religious leader. And one of them has more control over the army and actually does have a little bit more power. And if you look at where they're fighting their proxy wars, they're kind of like butting in, like a ram, butting into other people's territories and stuff. They're all in Syria and Iraq. They're up in Azerbaijan. They're down in Yemen and UAE and Bahrain and pretty much all over the Middle East, northward, westward, and southward. And I find that very peculiar. When I first was made known, when that was first made known to me, I had to really kind of stop and scratch my head because I had already come to be aware of Turkey and Erdogan and his regime. It's not all the Turkish people, nor is it all the Iranian people. Pray for them. Because the church, for what it's worth, is growing rapidly there under intense persecution, in specifically Iran and other parts of the Middle East. But Turkey has these Ottoman aspirations. They're very imperialistic, and they have expressed the wanting and yearning to resurrect the Islamic Caliphate, or another way to put it is the Ottoman Empire. There was a 7th empire that controlled Jerusalem. You see this in the book of Revelation. There's a dragon with 7 heads, and they're each an empire that controlled Jerusalem. One that was Rome. One is not. One was still in the future, and that was the Ottoman Empire. That's the one that followed Rome. Anyway, so that being said, so let's keep reading. Just I had to put that out there, like what Iran's kind of doing and the locations they're doing it. But speaking of Turkey, so we'll get to that. So while I was observing, this is verse 5. While I was observing, behold, a male goat was coming from the west over the surface of the entire earth without touching the ground, and the goat had a prominent horn between his eyes. This is like blitzkrieg style. They're moving rapidly. He came up from the ram that had 2 horns, which I had seen standing in front of the canal, and rushed at him in his mighty wrath. And I saw him come up beside the ram, and he was enraged at him. And he struck the ram and smashed his 2 horns, and the ram had no strength to withstand him. So he hurled him to the ground and trampled on him. And there was no one to rescue him from the ram, or no one to rescue the ram from his power. And the male goat made himself exceedingly great. But once he became powerful, the large horn was broken, and in its place 4 prominent horns came up towards the 4 winds of heaven. And again, Alexander the Great, we went through all of that. Now, theory 2, this is where it gets more speculative, because I mentioned Iran and where they're at, and it's just kind of something I'm watching. And I think it's fine to do. When you're speculating based on the lands the Bible says to look at, that's better. And that's watching. That's watching with wisdom and what the Bible actually says. For example, Obama's not the Antichrist. Trump is not the Antichrist. He's not an American president, right? The Bible is Middle Eastern, Israeli, North African centric. All of it surrounding Israel. Not that we aren't involved. Believers, by extension, are involved. But America is not specifically mentioned, and neither is Russia, for that matter. Magog has, I think there's archaeological finds and evidence that actually points to Magog being in Turkey. That's another topic for another time. But here, to speculate, I mentioned Turkey. So there's this goat from the land of Yavon. English says Greece. Yavon, Turkey, Istanbul, maybe even part of Greece, comes and fights him. So what this would look like, and this is why it's speculative, because this wouldn't have happened yet. If Theory 2 is right, this wouldn't have happened yet. But what Iran is doing, Turkey would end up getting involved, and they'd come to blows, and Turkey would win. Turkey would end up being able to claim all of their old Ottoman lands, because right now, between the two of them, they're all old Ottoman lands, and Turkey would, I guarantee they would claim it, because that's what they want anyway. And out of this, probably a leader will fall, NATO will probably step in, or some governing organization will step in, split it up into 4, and then the Antichrist comes up out of that. That's what that would look like. And this would be done in a shorter time. We get to 2,300 evenings and mornings here pretty soon. This would be a shorter time period. Basically, this would be conflict before the final 7 years. And like I said, this doesn't have to be the case. It could be. All right. Theory 1 could turn out to be true. So speaking of speculation, and I'll just get into this now, talking about Iran and what they're doing, if you look at the alliances forming in the Middle East, you're starting to see some southern alliances forming, and then some northern alliances also kind of forming. So this conflict may have already happened. This may be Theory 1, and this is why I'm not dogmatic about either. They could both be very much true. And you see, really, Turkey is, I will say, they have some diplomatic relations going on with Iran, and there's some things happening there. And there's going to be some time. And this, I'm actually speculating here for a reason, because here I'm about to get into a concrete sign that basically doesn't rely on Theory 1 or 2 either being true. Both, one could be true, the other could be wrong, but this right here is a concrete sign. So that ends the speculation. I'm just going to go ahead and end that there, because you can get into some weird stuff. Let's talk about the little horn, the abomination that sets up the abomination of desolation. And we're going to talk about what I believe is the first true and underdeveloped sign, but it's the first true concrete sign. All right, so starting in verse 9, chapter 8. And out of one of them, this is out of one of the 4 horns, out of one of them came a rather small horn. It was like Hitler, little Corporal Hitler that comes up in Germany, which grew exceedingly great towards the south, towards the east, and toward the beautiful land, that's Israel. It grew up to the heavenly lights, and some of the lights, that is, some of the stars, it threw to the ground and trampled them. It trampled them. It even exalted itself to be equal with the commander of the army, and it removed the regular sacrifice. It says here, this is the NASB. In others, it says, the daily sacrifice. This is a Jewish thing. It has to be done at a temple. Sacrifice from him, and the place of his sanctuary was overthrown. And because of an offense, the army will be given to the horn along with the regular sacrifice, and it will hurl truth to the ground and do as it pleases and be successful. Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to that particular one who was speaking, "How long will the vision about the regular sacrifice apply? While the offense causes horror," another way to say it is the transgression which makes desolate, the abomination of desolation, if you will, so as to allow both the sanctuary and the army to be trampled. And he said to me, for 2,300 evenings and mornings, and the sanctuary will be properly cleansed. Now, this will open our door into the abomination of desolation. I can go ahead and close this now. Excuse me. Look, the issue of the temple, the third temple, really, it triggers some Christians, and I can hear it now. Hunter, don't you know that the body is the temple of the Holy Spirit? There's no need for a temple. And I'm like, yeah, I totally agree. I'm not against that. But prophecy dictates that there will be one, because the regular sacrifices, or the twice daily sacrifices, can only be done at a temple according to Jewish law and tradition. And God is telling us there's going to be one. And Ezekiel even says there's going to be a third temple. And it will be the temple that's also going to be in the millennial reign. When Christ comes and reigns in Jerusalem, he will sit in a temple. Now, when we get to the new heaven and new earth, this is way off into the future. When we get to that, there will no longer be a temple there. But I also always want to tell people, hey, look, I do believe our body is the temple of the Holy Spirit. Jesus made that perfectly clear. But Jesus also demonstrated zeal for the temple that was built at the time. It's the same Jesus, and he's got the Spirit in him. It's his Spirit, but he's also got zeal for the temple. And right here in the prophecies of Daniel and Ezekiel dictate that there will be one. There's going to be a temple, and they will be doing daily sacrifices there. And when you see this begin, I've heard a prophecy teacher, he's one of my favorites, say that at this point you can count down to 2,300 days and you'll see the sky split. I don't necessarily think that's the case. I'll tell you why. I think that's more of a post-trib thing, but if the temple is being cleansed or restored, as it says in the NASB, it's the same thing. If the temple is being restored to its rightful place and being cleansed, that means Jesus has probably already come back and he's probably been walking around for a bit. Because look, the return of the Lord, the day of the Lord is both a day and a year of recompense, and 1,000 years. Because a day is 1,000 years to the Lord and 1,000 years is a day. There's also day to year prophecy, and then there's times that a day means literally a day. And speaking of, I've seen some people be dogmatic about this. Not very many, but there's some that look at the 2,300 evenings and mornings and call it a day to year prophecy and say that it's 2,300 days. I would suggest to you that it specifically means evenings and mornings, and it's the only place in Scripture you'll find something like that. And I believe because God's being specific, it's like, no, these are literal days. The sun will set and the sun will rise 2,300 times, evenings and mornings. And I believe we'll see Jesus return probably actually before that, and he will come on his cloud. I think he'll circle the globe. Light goes from east to west. This is some thinking right here. Now, he will go on a cloud to Egypt. This is Isaiah 19. He'll make his way towards the Arabian Peninsula, towards Sinai. I believe he'll land and redo the great theophany as in the Exodus, redo the Exodus, come up as the greater Moses, the greater Joshua, march towards Jerusalem, coming up from Edom, then coming from the south with the robe dipped in blood, entering into the eastern gate, and then taking his seat on the throne of his father David, the seed of David. And he'll kill the Antichrist by the brightness of his coming. And I think this is where the 2,300 evenings and mornings actually ends, when he enters into the temple. It's over. And, but anyway, so like I said, and I'll wrap it up right there. That is the first sign. And it's actually the one that sets up the context for the abomination of desolation that Jesus speaks of in Matthew 15. And so with that being said, what we're going to do here in the future is we're going to start talking about the Antichrist, the false prophet, the mark of the beast. We're going to start talking about guys like Hitler, Antiochus Epiphanes, Nero. It's going to get pretty heavy. We're going to also talk about Nebuchadnezzar, Pharaoh, the types of the Antichrist. But we are going to go through this a little bit slowly. We're going to walk. The Antichrist is a tough topic. I don't like suffering. I don't think anybody really does. And for anyone who's pre-trib, look, this is not an attack on anyone's faith. It is a call to endurance, enduring faith, to not love our lives until death. And for what it's worth, I don't believe here in America we'll face him directly. I believe the people in Israel will, the people in the Middle East and North Africa will face him directly. I've said this before. I think he'll have some tentacles here in America. He'll have followers around the world. The whole world will have his attention, for sure. But it's not like the whole world follows this guy, because ships from Kittim do oppose him. Egypt goes to war with him, and they lose. So, like I said, sorry, I'm tired. I've done this 4 times. so forgive me. But I'll go ahead and wrap it up there. So that is your first definitive sign, the third temple being built and sacrifices beginning. And if just for one more thing, actually, if you haven't heard, in Israel right now, there's this thing called the red heifer. It's an Old Testament sacrifice thing. It's for like ritual cleansing, purity. It's a red cow with no spot or blemish, no black hairs, no white hairs, just a red, all red cow that's sacrificed, I forget the type of wood, but it's sacrificed with hyssop and scarlet. And it's been almost 2,000 years since they've even had one. So it's rare. Well, it's back. And they are indeed preparing the sacrifice. They bought the plot of land on the Mount of Olives. They're going to sacrifice it. I don't know if it's going to be this fall or in the spring. Some have said it's probably going to happen here in the next few weeks. Some have said it's going to happen next year. That is not insignificant. That's actually not speculation. That's not insignificant. Now, I don't think that begins the 2,300 evenings and mornings, but it certainly sets it up. And it might begin it. We'll have to wait and see. But just putting that out there. And now I'll close. I'm tired, guys, so I'm going to go to bed. Everyone go get some rest. Have some fun tomorrow. Take a deep breath. Know that the Lord is with you no matter what is going on in your life, even unto the end of the age. Maranatha. See you later. We don't go around tonight. It's about to take your life.